Have you considered starting a podcast for your business? Or maybe you already have one but are afraid of pod fading because you just didn't realize how much time post-production would take. I can help. My company, podseam.com, makes podcasting as seamless as possible. We help you launch, manage, market, and monetize your podcast seamlessly. We do more than just podcast editing and production. We help you leverage the power of podcasting to get new leads and grow your business. Learn more at podseam.com. That's PODSEAM.com. Welcome to the Frugalpreneur Podcast. I'm your host, Sarah St. John, and my guest today is known as the Podcast Lawyer. Please welcome Gordon Firemark.
Hi, Sarah. Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for coming on. I'm excited about this to learn more about legal stuff and for podcasters in particular. So can you tell us a little bit more about your background history and how you got into this specific niche?
Oh, well, I'd be delighted to. Thanks. Yeah. So I've been practicing entertainment law, entertainment media and business law since 1992 when I finished law school, and very quickly after law school went out on my own to do my version, my flavor of entertainment and media law. And for a long time, that was theater and film and television kind of stuff and all the legal issues that come up around those areas. And I discovered podcasting as a listener, basically, when I was a fan of a geeky show on a geeky channel, Tech TV. Leo Laporte, who is a big name podcaster now, was the host of this show called, I don't remember what it was called, The Tech Guys or something like that. And he started a podcast when the network was shut down. And I started listening to the show and it was fun. And I thought I could do that. That's an interesting format. And as a lawyer, I thought, well, I'll do something about entertainment law. And I have a co-host. And we got ourselves together a show that's now been running for 12 years called Entertainment Law Update. And in the course of getting up and running, I realized that I had wanted to confirm some thinking about how radio works versus how podcasting and other kinds of media work. And I went looking for legal resources and there just weren't any. So I sat down and I wrote a book called The Podcast Blog and New Media Producers Legal Survival Guide. And when you write a book, it makes you an expert. So I now have to live up to that and stay on top of it and all that. And I really love working with podcasters, being one myself and knowing how it goes and having an enthusiasm for the techie, geeky stuff and microphones and toys. I really enjoy being a part of the world and I'm here to help. I want to help folks stay on the straight and narrow, out of trouble and avoid the big kinds of problems and challenges that come up for podcasters.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think that's interesting that you found an area where there wasn't anything or any information. And
you know what they say, the riches are in the niches.
Yeah.
I'll let you know if that's true. Give me time.
What specifically should podcasters be concerned with when it comes to legal? I mean, obviously the music factor, and we can go into that, but like what other types of legal issues could we run into?
Well, if you don't mind, let me walk you through a little framework that I have that basically it all comes down to taking a professional approach to things. If you want to have success in really any field, but I'm going to use podcasting, I think you have to do three things. One is you have to start with a mindset, thinking legit, having the attitude of success. That's a little woo-woo kind of a thing about the law of attraction, but be the person you want to be so you can have the things that those people have. Be, do, have is the model rather than wait until you have everything and then you can be it. You got to be there first in your head. So think legit. Secondly is you have to plan legit, having a business plan, having a marketing plan, having a fallback plan in case of problems and emergencies. These are the hallmarks of a professional approach to things. And finally, then you have to, as I said, be legit, behave legit, do the things. And for me, there are four basic elements to the legal stuff that podcasters need to concern themselves with. First off is their business structure, entities, LLCs, corporations, things like that. When's the right time? When we can talk about all of this in a second, but the legal structure, the team structure, you can't go alone. You want to get somewhere, you want to go far, go together. If you want to go fast, go alone is what they say. So you have to build a team and you have to do that in a way that protects everybody's rights and ownership and those kinds of things. You have to protect intellectual property. You have to look out for your own IP as well as others. And that's the area that's sort of most commonly in people's minds. Oh, what do I need to do to use music? Or I want to read a Dickens story into my microphone for my Christmas episode or something like that. And then the fourth element is that customers and clients. How are you going to make money from this? And that's not essential. Not everybody's here to make a living doing podcasting, but wouldn't it be nice if the bills got paid by the podcast? So it's those four components that are the real, I guess, of professional approach to podcasting. That first one, business entities. I'm a firm believer that people should treat their podcast like a business, even if they're not in it to make money, setting up an entity of some sort. Because if you're doing it alone, you can have your podcast with no other structure to it. You're the owner. You are it. You're working without a net. You are the podcast. The podcast is you. If something happens, those folks are going to come looking directly to you. If it makes money, that money comes directly to you. If it loses money, the money comes out of your pocket, all those things. But as soon as you start to have another person, if you have a co-host or a producer or someone like that, it starts to look like a partnership. It is a partnership, and partners split things equally, and it makes sense to get things in writing. But you're still working without that net. You are the podcast is you. And that means anything that happens, they come looking to you. Setting up something like a corporation, or nowadays mostly it's an LLC, a limited liability company, allows for some insulation from liability. That is, your own personal stuff stays your personal stuff, and the company is responsible for the things that happen in the business. So yes, you pay taxes at the company level. That's one of the downsides, but you have that insulation from liability. You can use the company structure to set up the management and control and the division of proceeds and assets and things like that. So I think that's really valuable. I sort of refer to that as part of like a podcast prenup. You can get your co-hosts on, everybody in line with here's who owns what, and here's what happens if we eventually break up and go our separate way. Who gets the house? Who gets the kid? So that takes us into the team side of things, the team structure. Same issue. If you have people working on the show with you, you need to have something in writing that documents the nature of those relationships to, what's the word I'm looking for? Just to, so that there's clarity. So everybody's on the same page and has the same expectations, whether that's a freelance editor or a graphic designer who does your show notes, or a co-host that is just a co-host and not a co-owner. That's the structure I have with my show. And it could be your researcher, your producer, anybody. It pays to get these things clarified in writing, because under intellectual property law, copyright law in particular, when two or more people come together to make a single work, like an episode of a podcast, they will be deemed in the eyes of the law co-owners, joint authors of that work, unless there's clear evidence of some contrary intention. It comes down to, how do you prove the intention of the parties? Well, the best way to do that is to get them to say so before they do the work, right? So that's one of the things that leads to my big crusade, which is every single guest who comes on a podcast should sign a release form of some sort. You can do it online. It doesn't have to be mail me a piece of paper, sign it and send it back and those kinds of things. But there should be some process where they have acknowledged, they understand that you own the show, that they're not getting paid, that they're consenting to be recorded, because we all have a right of privacy, and that consent is being given irrevocably forever, so that the podcaster can use the content in any way they want. I like to say in any and all media, whatever, all that kind of stuff in my release form, which by the way is available for free to anybody who wants it at podcastrelease.com. So come on over and give me an email. It's not free. You have to give me your email to get the freebie. Podcastrelease.com. Anyway, so use a podcast release. That's your contract with your guest that says, I don't claim any ownership over your show, Mr. Podcast or Ms. Podcaster. I'm doing this because I have my own reasons, basically. So that's the team side of it. Everybody who works on a show, everybody who appears on your show should sign something. And that intellectual property protection starts with that agreement. You've talked about copyright on the show before. I know the basic rule is, if you are the author of a work, you own the copyright from the moment of its inception. And it lasts for a good long time, life of the author plus 70 years. And you have the exclusive right to do those things, the copying, the distribution, the making derivative works, performing and displaying the work. And nobody else can do that without your permission. But that's a double-edged sword, because if you want to use someone else's stuff in your show, you need their permission as a general rule. And that brings us to the music question that we talked about. Let's table that for a second, and I'll finish my little framework. I know I'm talking constantly, not giving you a chance. And the fourth one is the clients and customer strategy, having a clear strategy for that. And again, you don't have to have a strategy to make money, but it's nice to know how you could. Advertising is one approach, affiliates, there's lots of different approaches, and each of them has their sort of legal consequences. But mostly it comes down to having the right contracts in place so that you know you're going to get paid when you're supposed to, and You're going to deliver what you're supposed to deliver under the agreements and keep everybody happy.
I was actually going to ask about your opinion on a guest release, so I'm glad you covered that. And I'm definitely going to download that and start using that. Now, for all my past guests where I haven't done that,
Yeah.
can I or should I send it to them to have them sign it now, or would that kind of seem silly?
It would be a little peculiar, and
Okay.
it runs the risk that the guest gets the request for the release, and now they have second thought. Why is she wanting me to sign this thing? And what did I say? That kind of thing. So I would say if you've got a backlog of episodes and you haven't used a release, it's probably not super important to go back and get releases from everybody. Let the sleeping dogs lie, basically.
Right.
If it's going okay and nobody's complaining and nobody's asking you to take an episode down, leave it alone until and unless you decide to repurpose that content. If you were suddenly going to take the podcast and make it a paid subscription podcast, you might need to do something. If you're going to include it inside a course behind a paywall or something like that, that's when guests start to look and say, wait a minute, you're making money off my performance. Where's my piece? And that's when you want to get that. And the consequence, of course, may be that you have to give them a piece in order to get them to sign the thing. But having that permission and consent it goes a long way to protecting you in those scenarios. I should also say, it doesn't have to be wet ink on paper. Use an online form. Use a template of some sort that when they sign up, like we did, I signed up on your schedule to book this appointment. You could have that system generate a page where I tick a box and type my name and something to indicate my consent. And that works really, really well.
Because I think on the scheduling software I use, I think I can then send it to a landing page of some sort after.
Yeah.
So I could have it send to like a form if there's not a way to directly include it in the book. Yeah, I'll have to look into that. That's going to be...
Yeah, you could probably set it up in the booking form and do it that way too. That's what I do.
Yeah, that'll be my task for this afternoon. After this, I'm going to figure all that out.
I gave you homework.
So then, yeah, you were going to go into music because a lot of people wrongly assume that you're allowed to use up to 30 seconds of a song without, I guess, the whole fair use thing. But that apparently is not true. After I was researching things like that, I never did that, but I looked into it and I was like, yeah, that seems fishy to me.
All right. Well, if you don't mind, let me start at the beginning. I already said copyright belongs to the author of the work from the moment it's created, and they own those exclusive rights. That means that if somebody sits down and writes a song, they own it. Now, most popular songs have been part of a deal between the songwriter and a music publishing company. So it's the publishing company now that, if not owns, at least controls the rights to the song. And they're the ones that it's their job to find ways to make money from songs. So they don't want people playing that song without their consent and permission and a payment of a royalty or something. That's part one. When somebody then records the song, there's a second copyright because the recording. So if you want to use a piece of recorded music in your podcast episode, you've got 2 copyrights to consider. Then we have to consider the different rights that are implicated with using a piece of music in a podcast. The first one being that downloadable media file. When you do that, first of all, when you incorporate the song into your podcast, you're doing what's called making a derivative work. That's one of the rights under copyright. The second thing you're doing is making a copy for each person who downloads it, right? Copy onto each device. Then you have the performance. When it's streaming, that's a performance, and that's a different right. And to complicate things, it's handled by a different group of people. The music publishers control the musical composition, the songwriters side of it for all these things, but they delegate the responsibility for collecting the performance royalties to organizations called performing rights organizations. Here in the US, that would be ASCAP and BMI, and there's a couple of the CSAC and GMR. In other countries, it's names for these entities, but their job is all they do is collect these royalties for these so-called small performing rights. I'm not going to get into what large ones are, but anyway. So we've got the small performing rights. Then we've got the sound recording. Now, in terrestrial radio, traditional old broadcast radio, there is no performance right that relates to the recording. So the record companies were just out of luck. I mean, it was good for them because in the old days, radio was how they sold records. They'd play the song on the radio and people would go, oh, I love that. I want to go buy it. Well, nobody buys records anymore. So in the digital age, they have gotten an adjustment, a congressional act to add a performance right for digital transmissions of music, of recordings. So now they do get that. And that's handled by yet another agency called Sound Exchange. But then there's still the right to synchronize the music with what's going on in the show. That's the derivative work thing. And the download, the copy, those are rights you still have to get directly from the publisher or from publishers' agents. So it's a very complicated 4 or sometimes even 5 stop shopping just for one song, one recorded song in an episode of a podcast. Try doing that every week with more than one song. It gets to be a real big hassle and expensive. So unfortunately, there's no good way to use popular music in a podcast episode yet. I know some folks are working on it. The guys at podcastmusic.com are trying to develop a subscription license system where you would pay them a monthly or an annual fee, and you would have access to all the music in their catalog. And there's a few other companies like that doing it. The problem is their catalog is not very deep. There's not a lot of stuff in there. And you're probably never going to get to use the Rolling Stones and the Who and the Beatles without directly dealing with the owners of that stuff. So not to say it's impossible. It's just hard and expensive. So unless you've got the bankroll behind you, they want to think about using stock music or one of these subscription services, some of which are really good. And if it's not about using a particular song because you want to be the next hot radio DJ, that can be a really good solution.
Yeah, I was going to ask your opinion on that. I've heard of podcast music, and I know there are a few others that have stock music. Are there particular ones that you recommend, maybe that have music and even sound effects even?
Yeah, a lot of them do have sound effects libraries as well. The stock music is a different category than what I'm going to call songs. It's songs in the stock libraries, but it's available. Anybody who wants to can get that song and use it. And I guess that's true of anything, but it tends to be sort of generic sounding, plain sounding music. I want a Western melody. So you hear the big French horn soaring sound with the violins and then the trumpets, that kind of thing. And that can be fine if you're just looking for a little bed music or something to do as a transition. If you want something that's a little more pop music sounding, a little more, I don't want to say the word real music, but you know what I mean, more custom sounding or more like what we're hearing on the radio and in the pop charts, then these subscription services are a little better. Podcastmusic.com is one. The guys over there are great. I'm actually going to be speaking on a panel with them next week at Podcast Movement in Nashville. And then another one that I use a lot is Epidemic Sound, where as long as you remain a subscriber, you have access to their whole catalog. And they've got lots of different genres, and they have sound effects and things like that for, I think it's about $15 a month is the fee. So not outrageous, similar to what you pay for hosting.
That helps because I think a lot of people think they can just use anything and everything as long as it's within however many seconds.
One caveat I want to give is there are some of the stock services out there that you pay once for the song, and that's what they call royalty free because you're not paying ongoing every time it's used. But you've got to be really careful about paying attention to what the license agreement actually allows. I've seen a situation where somebody bought the song thinking they could use it as the opener for their show. So they paid the $35, they download the song, they put it in the opening of their show, and then they do episode 2 and episode 3 and episode 4. Now you've got it in 5 or 6 or 10, however many it was. And then they get a note from the licensing company saying, you only licensed it for single use.
Oh.
So they were going to have to pay $35 for each episode of the show. Now that may or may not be outrageous, depending on the scope of things, but you want to know that kind of thing going in when you're making an informed decision about what to buy. So read carefully.
Yeah, because I know there's several of those like royalty-free sites where you can download and then use it. So when you do that, there's going to be some sort of like terms and conditions or something.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, you want to, when you're buying, usually there's a link right there before you click buy, make sure, are you buying the standard license or the extended license or whatever? And you want to read and make sure you're using the right one. And on some of the services, none of them actually allows for multiple uses and some do. So I don't want to recommend particular brands, but some are better than others. So just got to be careful.
Interesting. I'm going to have to go back and look at that.
And by the way, please, this is not a cause for everybody to be worried and start panicking.
Yeah.
It's just something to sort of have your eyes open when you do these things.
So one main thing we need to think about is the music. Another would be guest release. Another would be if you have a team of some sort or co-host or co-owner, all that stuff. Is that about it? Those are the main...
Another issue that I see coming up a lot for podcasters is conflicts with their title. So ask yourself this. If you're starting a new show and you're just choosing a title, do as detailed a search as you can. Not just Google, not just the iTunes or the Apple Music Store, Apple Podcasts. Do as broad a search as you can. There are search companies out there that can really do a name availability search. And I would recommend spending a little money on that because it's always going to be worse to change the title after the fact. If you've got 5, 10, 50, 100 episodes in, and then you find out there was somebody else out there with a conflicting title and they were there first. You want to figure that out. Choosing a title for your show, it should be distinctive. That is not just plain vanilla generic. I'll tell you, do as I say, not as I do. My show is called Entertainment Law Update. Pretty much can't be more descriptive of what the show is than that. So over time, because we've been doing the show for 12 and a half years now, we've acquired a distinctiveness. Our audience connects it with us. It's a secondary meaning to them. And that means we're entitled to trademark protection. But normally a descriptive or generic term isn't. So choose something distinctive and not purely descriptive or whatever, and that doesn't confuse with other shows. If you ask yourself, will it hurt if someone else comes along and uses the same title as mine or something that's very similar? Would that confusion be a bad thing? And I think the answer is usually going to be yes. That's when I say maybe you want to think about registering a trademark for the title of your show. And you can do that anytime in the life of your show, but earlier is better, of course. The way trademark law works is that these distinctive words and symbols and marks that are used to identify a source or origin of certain goods or services. For example, an entertainment content show or a downloadable audio file. You can protect that against confusingly similar titles and names. I had a train of thought that has now left the station without me. Anyway, so yeah, registering a trademark is a good way to protect against that confusing similar show title problem. There's an expense to it, but it's a preventative measure, I guess you could say. And as long as it's distinctive, you should be able to get it registered. And I recommend registering in both for the downloadable and for the streaming version of things, because one's a service and one's considered goods. By the way, I need to just say, I'm not here to give anybody any specific legal advice. And just because I'm a lawyer and you're hearing my voice doesn't mean I'm your lawyer. So everybody listening, just be mindful of that. And what you're hearing here is I'm trying to be as general in the information as I can.
So let's see. So people, if they want to learn more, can go to thepodcastlawyer.com. And then you also have the Easy Legal for Podcasters, which has different forms and templates for podcasters. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, Easy Legal for Podcasters started out as a library or a store where you could buy individual templates and forms, things like a co-host release or a release for your graphic designer, those kinds of things. And I realized that a lot of people needed a little more instruction. They need a little more understanding of that framework that I laid out for you. And not just the why and the what, but also the how to do it, whether it's forming that LLC or corporation or registering a trademark or copyrights and trade secrets and all those things. So I created it as a course with all these templates and forms. And the forms are available a la carte as well, but I think the course is a great deal. It's called Easy Legal for Podcasters.
And is that just easylegalforpodcasters.com?
.com.
Okay.
Yeah. Or go to thepodcastlawyer.com and there's a link there too, I believe.
Oh, okay.
If there isn't, there will be later today.
And then the Legal Survival Guide as well, your book, people can grab there as well.
Podcast Law Book is the way to get that.
Oh, okay. Okay, Podcast Law Book. And then, or GordonFiremark.com if they want more general information. And then I'll have shown...
That's sort of the hub of the wheel, yeah. Everywhere, everything leads from there, so...
Okay, so maybe that's the place to send them. GordonFiremark.com.
Yeah, go to GordonFiremark.com. Nobody's going to forget that. And nobody else is going to take the name either.
I'll also have show notes with links to all of these at thesarahstjohn.com/podcast law. Well, thank you so much for your time. And was there anything else that you wanted to say in closing?
I just wrap up by, again, suggesting, hey, even if you're not in this to make money from your podcasting, even if you're not about it being your business, it does pay to be professional in the approach to things, because let's face it, people respect a professional attitude, a professional approach. How many times have you encountered someone who just is sort of half-baked about everything they do and you don't think very highly of them? So being professional, that partly in podcasting, we often talk about being consistent, showing up every week with your episodes, those kinds of things. That's part of professionalism too. So having a professional approach, being business-like about it, even if it's not your business.
Well, awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me, Sarah. It's great to meet you.
Do you have a podcast that isn't growing the way you want it to? There may be a simple reason for that, but you aren't sure how to decipher what the problem is. That's where Podcast Audit comes in. I am offering a new service where you send me a podcast episode of your choice, and I audit the podcast for your cover art, podcast name, intro and outro, episode titles, format, sound quality, production value, episode graphics, length, flow, on-air performance, calls to action, podcast directory discovery, podcast website, show notes, social media presence, and more. I am offering this service for just $97 for a limited time. Get your audit today at podseam.com/podcast audit. That's PODSEAM.com/podcast audit.